Hey there, drowsy explorer, and welcome to yet another soothing stroll through the hidden corridors of history. Before we gently uncover the shadowed traditions of medieval courts, I'd like to extend a warm whisper your way, dear listener. Whether you're nestled in for the night, unwinding with the soft glow of your screen, or simply in search of calm narratives to ease your thoughts into repose, I'm so glad you've wandered here. If you'd be so kind, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what hour the clock strikes for you. It's always enchanting to map our shared community of twilight tale seekers and history whisperers. And if these peaceful peeks into the past help you drift away, a like or subscribe would be a lovely way to ensure more tranquil travels await. But for now, let's allow the clamour of the day to hush as we slip into the dimly lit chambers of medieval Europe, where crowns were forged not just in gold, but in the fragile alliances of youth. Imagine yourself as a silent attendant in a drafty castle, witnessing the unions of child monarchs, betrothals sealed in cradles, driven by ambition, survival, and the unyielding grip of power. We'll explore why these early marriages were commonplace among kings and queens, a dark thread in history's tapestry woven from politics, peril, and poignant isolation, shared in hushed tones to carry you softly towards slumber. Congratulations, dear listener. You've just been whisked away to the hushed confines of a medieval royal nursery where the air is thick with the scent of fresh rushes scattered across the stone floor and the faint, soothing crackle of a low fire in the hearth, warding off the perpetual chill of castle walls. It's sometime in the 12th or 13th century, perhaps in the grand halls of Windsor or the fortified towers of Edinburgh, and you find yourself as a silent attendant, a nursemaid or chamberlain, tending to the cradle of a future monarch. The room is dimly lit by tallow candles flickering in iron holders, casting long shadows on tapestries depicting heroic knights and biblical scenes, their colours muted in the soft glow. Outside, the wind whispers through arrow slits, carrying the distant lowing of cattle or the muffled clang of blacksmiths in the bailey below. In this cradle of power, innocence and intrigue entwine from the very first breath, as infants barely out of swaddling clothes are pledged in marriage to secure dynasties that span kingdoms. These early betrothals weren't mere formalities. They were the delicate threads weaving together the fabric of empires, each illustration a blend of strategy and survival, each vow a quiet echo of ambition dressed in the guise of tender care. The cradle itself is a masterpiece of medieval craftsmanship, carved from dark oak with intricate motifs of lions and roses, symbolizing strength and nobility, lined with soft linens embroidered by skilled hands in distant convents. Rocking it gently, you might hum a lullaby in Latin or the vernacular tongue, the words a rhythmic murmur echoing off the high ceilings, each note a soothing balm against the stone-cold reality of the world outside. But even as the babe slumbers peacefully, their tiny fists clutching a silver rattle engraved with the family crest, the weight of destiny presses in like a soft, insistent fog rolling off the moors. In medieval Europe, from the Plantagenets of England to the Capetians of France, betrothals could occur as early as infancy, a practice rooted in the fragility of power and the ceaseless churn of political necessity. Take Mary, Queen of Scots, pledged at just 5 years old to the Dauphin of France in 1548, a union orchestrated amid the turbulent politics of the Tudor era, where Scotland's throne hung precariously between Catholic and Protestant factions, her tiny form dressed in miniature velvets for the occasion, her eyes wide with the innocence of one unaware of the chains being forged around her future. Mary's betrothal wasn't unique. It echoed a long tradition where royal children were seen not as individuals with childhoods to cherish, but as living seals on treaties, their futures bartered like fine silks in a merchant's hall, each negotiation a hushed conversation over flickering candlelight. As you gaze upon the sleeping child, perhaps no more than a few months old, the reasons for these cradle pledges unfold like the pages of an illuminated manuscript, each border adorned with vines and mythical beasts, each letter gilded in gold leaf that catches the fire's glow. Medieval society was a precarious pyramid, with monarchs at the apex, constantly threatened by ambitious nobles, foreign invaders, and the ever-present spectre of civil war that could erupt like a sudden storm over the English Channel. High infant mortality, due to diseases like the flux, measles, or simple fevers untreated by rudimentary medicine involving herbal poultices and bloodletting, meant that heirs were precious and precarious, their survival a gamble against the odds. By betrothing children early, families ensured continuity. If one spouse died young, as was tragically common, the alliance could be swiftly realigned, but the initial pledge locked in loyalties that might otherwise fray like worn tapestry threads. The nursery, with its wooden toys scattered like forgotten relics, tiny carved knights on horseback, cloth poppets stuffed with wool and scented with dried lavender to repel fleas, became a stage for diplomacy, a place where the seeds of empires were sown amid the soft coos of babes. Ambassadors in velvet doublets and feathered caps would arrive, bearing miniature portraits or locks of hair from distant princelings, their voices low and reverent as they discussed dowries of vast lands, golden ducats, and strategic ports over mulled wine spiced with cinnamon, cloves, and ginger, the aroma mingling with the milky scent of the infant's breath and the faint earthy tang of the rushes underfoot. These envoys, often weary from long rides through rain-soaked forests or across choppy seas, carried sealed parchments with wax impressions of royal sigils, their contents outlining the terms of unions that would bind kingdoms for generations. In the flickering light, you might overhear snippets of conversation, debates over inheritance clauses, provisions for regencies if the child king or queen ascended too soon, all while the fire pops softly, sending sparks dancing like fireflies in the dim room. In this world, preventing rival claims was paramount, a quiet but relentless undercurrent that shaped every royal cradle. Medieval inheritance laws, often following primogeniture where the eldest son took all, left younger siblings or daughters as potential flashpoints for rebellion, their claims like smouldering embers that could ignite into full conflagrations of war. Marrying them off young, sometimes to cousins or even uncles in more insular dynasties, neutralized threats by binding families closer, turning potential adversaries into kin, bound by sacred vows. Consider the Holy Roman Empire under the Hohenstaufens, where Frederick II betrothed his infant son Henry to a nobleman's daughter to quell uprisings in Sicily around 1211, the proxy ceremony, a solemn affair in a chapel adorned with frescoes of saintly martyrs, the air heavy with frankincense from swinging censers, and the soft chant of monks invoking divine blessing on the union. The child's playtime was curtailed by lessons in courtly manners from an early age, their dolls dressed in the colours of a future spouse's house, innocence eroded by the inexorable pull of power that began with a simple exchange of rings too large for tiny fingers. Building alliances from birth was another cornerstone, a gentle yet insistent current shaping these young lives like a river carving through ancient stone. Europe in the Middle Ages was a patchwork of feuding realms. England at odds with France in endless border skirmishes, the Iberian kingdoms fractured by the Reconquista against Moorish strongholds, the Italian city-states a cauldron of papal intrigue and merchant rivalries. Child betrothals acted as bridges across these divides, turning potential enemies into in-laws whose blood mingled in the veins of future heirs. The marriage of 6-year-old Joan of England to Alexander II of Scotland in 1241 was designed to ease border tensions, her tiny hand placed in his during a proxy ceremony amid the scent of beeswax candles and fresh-strewn herbs like rosemary and thyme to symbolize fidelity and remembrance. As an attendant, you might prepare the child for departure, packing trunks with embroidered gowns, prayer books bound in calfskin, and small trinkets like silver thimbles or ivory combs, the air thick with the lavender sachets tucked among the folds to ward off vermin on the long journey through mist-shrouded highlands or verdant valleys. Sensory details envelop this scene, drawing you deeper into the immersion like a warm blanket on a chilly eve. The cradle rocks with a soft creak, the wood polished smooth by generations of royal babes, its canopy draped in silk brocade embroidered with golden threads that catch the light like stars in a twilight sky. Nearby, a wet nurse hums a melody from the troubadour songs popular in the courts of Aquitaine, her voice a soothing drone blending with the distant toll of chapel bells calling for matins, their peals echoing through the stone corridors like a call to prayer. The room's air is warmed by a brazier glowing with charcoal, releasing a faint smoky haze that clings to the heavy velvet curtains drawn against draughts, while the faint scent of rosewater from the ewer on the washstand mingles with the herbal infusions steeping for the child's bath. Chamomile and mint to calm tender skin. Toys scatter the floor, wooden horses painted in heraldic colours of red and gold, cloth dolls with stitched faces mimicking foreign royalty, jointed puppets on strings for shadow plays by candlelight, each a subtle indoctrination into the world of alliances, where even playtime whispered of future duties. Yet the opulence masks a confining reality that tugs at the soul, like a persistent draught through ill-fitted shutters. Royal nurseries were gilded prisons, guarded by loyal retainers clad in livery of wool and linen, their swords at their sides to prevent abduction or poisoning. Common fears in an age of treachery where rivals lurked in every shadow. Children like the future Richard II of England, betrothed at age 4 to Anne of Bohemia in 1381 amid the peasants' revolt's unrest, grew up under constant surveillance, their playmates carefully chosen from noble stock to foster early bonds that might one day secure loyalty. The sensory world reinforces this isolation. The rustle of stiff brocade gowns as ladies in waiting bustle about with trays of possets and pap, the faint jingle of keys on the chatelain's belt, unlocking chests of jewels for tiny coronets worn during formal audiences with visiting dignitaries. Betrothals were celebrated with quiet pomp, a miniature feast in the solar room adjacent, with spiced Hippocras wine for adults, its cinnamon warmth filling the air, and watered ale for the young, toasts raised to future prosperity amid the clink of silver goblets. But the child's wide eyes might reflect confusion or quiet fear, their small world already mapped by adults' ambitions, a dark veil over the sunlit days of childhood. Examples abound, painting a tapestry of this practice across Europe and beyond, each thread a story of power's quiet grip. In Byzantium, echoing medieval traditions with its blend of Roman legacy and Orthodox piety, Emperor Alexios I Komnenos betrothed his daughter Anna at age 8 to a noble heir around 1081, securing internal stability amid Turkish threats from the east. The ceremony in the Hagia Sophia would be awash in incense and golden mosaics depicting Christ Pantocrator, the air resonant with Greek chants from robed priests, a portrait of Eastern splendor married to calculated politics. Closer to the heart of Western Europe, the betrothal of 2-year-old Matilda of England to Henry V, Holy Roman Emperor, in 1109 forged ties between Anglo-Norman realms and the German Empire, her nursery transformed into a hub of envoys bearing gifts of ivory combs, illuminated psalters with vellum pages soft as lambskin, and small reliquaries containing saints' bones for protection on her future journeys. These unions prevented fragmentation. Without them, kingdoms could splinter through disputed successions, as seen in the anarchy following Henry I's death in 1135, where unchecked rival claims led to decades of civil war, villages burned and fields left fallow under the weight of marching armies. The cradle pledges acted as safeguards, quiet promises whispered over sleeping forms that the realm would endure. In the Iberian Peninsula, amid the Reconquista's fervour, young Alfonso VIII of Castile was betrothed at age 2 to Eleanor of England in 1170, a union to bolster Christian alliances against Moorish forces. The nursery air scented with olive oil lamps and the distant call of muezzins from conquered mosques, a reminder of the stakes at play. Further north in the Scandinavian courts, Eric IX of Sweden betrothed his infant daughter to a Norwegian prince in the mid-12th century to heal Viking-era rifts. the long halls filled with the scent of pine resin from torches and the sound of skalds reciting sagas of heroic unions. The human element tugs gently at the heartstrings in this cradle of power, a poignant counterpoint to the grandeur. Young royals, like the infant Isabella of Valois, pledged at 6 to Richard II in 1396 as a truce in the 100 Years' War, faced separation from family, sent to foreign lands where languages differed like unfamiliar melodies and customs felt as alien as distant stars. Imagine the quiet sobs muffled in feather pillows stuffed with down from castle geese, the nursemaid's soothing coos as she rocks the cradle with a foot pedal, promising tales of glory to come amid the scent of beeswax from sealing wax on betrothal documents. Alliances built this way brought peace. Isabella's marriage temporarily halted the endless cycle of sieges and battles, but at the cost of childhood joys, like running through sun-dappled orchards or playing hide-and-seek in haylofts, freedoms enjoyed by peasant children whose laughter echoed from the village green below the battlements. Sensory immersion deepens the poignancy further, like a tapestry woven with threads of gold and sorrow. The soft wool of a favourite blanket left behind on a carriage seat, the taste of unfamiliar spices in new courts, coriander and saffron from distant trade routes, the echo of laughter from those peasant children playing freely outside the walls, a world denied to those born to rule under the weight of ermine-trimmed mantles too heavy for small shoulders. In the nursery, daily routines blend care with calculation, baths in copper tubs filled with water heated over the hearth, scented with rose petals to mask the underlying odour of lye soap, meals of soft pottage made from oats, milk and honey, fed with silver spoons engraved with mottos like Dieu est mon droit, God and my right, a constant reminder of divine kingship even in the simplest acts. Lessons began early. Alphabet blocks carved with heraldic symbols, stories from the lives of saints like Edward the Confessor, whose own early betrothals mirrored the child's fate. As the morning light filters through leaded windows, casting patterns like scattered jewels on the flagstone floor, worn smooth by countless footsteps, the tone of innocence, entangled with intrigue, settles in like a fine mist. These early betrothals were born of necessity in a brutal era where thrones teetered on the edge of chaos, and the nursery served as the first battlefield. The dimly lit chambers, with their lullabies and embroidered cradles, masked the dark machinery of power, children as pawns in games they couldn't comprehend, their futures scripted in ink on vellum before they could speak their first words. Yet, in their quiet resilience, flickers of humanity endured, a stolen moment of play amid lessons in heraldry, a whispered prayer for a kind spouse from a nursemaid's lips as she tucks in the covers. Little do you know, as we drift onward from this cradle, how these pledges would evolve into full-fledged political pawns, where alliances forged in youth carried the weight of nations on fragile shoulders. But for now, rest in the gentle rock of the cradle, where power's first whispers begin. Congratulations, dear listener. You've now stepped from the sheltered shadows of the royal nursery into the broader, more turbulent corridors of a medieval castle, where the stone walls echo with the distant clatter of armoured knights and the soft rustle of silk gowns trailing across flagstone floors. It's a crisp autumn day in, say, the 13th century, and you find yourself as a discreet observer, perhaps a page or lady-in-waiting, in the great hall of a fortress like Chinon in France or Stirling in Scotland. The air carries the faint, comforting aroma of wood smoke from the massive hearth, mingled with the herbal tang of strewing rushes, lavender and meadowsweet crushed underfoot to freshen the space, and the richer notes of beeswax from candles guttering in wrought-iron sconces. Tapestries line the walls, their woven scenes of hunts and battles faded slightly by time, while high windows let in slivers of pale sunlight that danced like fireflies on the polished oak tables laden with silver ewers and goblets. Here, in this world of flickering torchlight and whispered counsel, young royals transition from cradle pledges to active pieces on the chessboard of power. Child marriages, often consummated or formalized in adolescence, served as the mortar binding fractured kingdoms, but they came at a profound human cost. dark isolation for the youthful brides and grooms dispatched like diplomatic missives to foreign courts. As we settle into this serene yet shadowed chapter, let's explore how these unions were political pawns, forging alliances amid endless threats, their stories told in hushed tones to ease you deeper into reflection. The great hall buzzes softly with activity, servants in woolen tunics scurrying to polish armour or arrange platters of venison and manchette bread for the midday meal, their footsteps a rhythmic patter on the stone. At the high table, under a canopy of embroidered velvet, bearing the royal arms, perhaps lions rampant or fleur-de-lis, a council gathers. Grizzled advisors in fur-trimmed robes, their voices low as they pore over maps inked on vellum. Quills scratching notes on parchments sealed with wax. In the midst of this, a young royal, barely into their teens, sits poised but wide-eyed, dressed in finery that weighs heavy on slender shoulders, a kirtle of damask silk for a princess, or a doublet of velvet for a prince, embroidered with gold thread that catches the light like distant stars. This is the age when betrothals bloom into marriages, often at 12 or 14, driven by the relentless machinery of politics. Isabella of France, wed at just 12 to Edward II of England in 1308, exemplifies this. Her union a calculated move to solidify Anglo-French ties amid simmering border disputes, her small frame adorned in a gown of crimson samite for the ceremony in Bologna, the air filled with the peal of bells and the scent of incense from the cathedral altar. As you linger unobtrusively in a corner alcove, perhaps polishing a silver chalice with a soft cloth scented faintly of vinegar, the strategic motivations unfold like a banner in the breeze. Medieval Europe was a cauldron of conflict, constant wars over territories like Aquitaine or Normandy, where kings vied for land as fiercely as wolves for prey. Child marriages allowed rulers to unite warring factions without immediate bloodshed, turning swords into olive branches sealed by youthful vows. Isabella's marriage, for instance, was part of a broader truce in the Anglo-Scottish Wars, her dowry including claims to vast estates that could tip the balance of power. The political chess game began early, envoys arriving on foam-flecked horses bearing sealed letters proposing unions that would merge crowns and quell rebellions. In the hall you might overhear the king's chancellor murmuring about dowries, tracts of fertile land, chests of gold florins or strategic ports like Bordeaux, while the young bride-to-be practices her curtsy before a looking-glass of polished metal, her reflection wavering like a dream in the dim light. These alliances were lifelines in an era of perpetual threat, where invasion loomed like storm clouds over the Channel. The 100 Years' War, brewing in the 14th century, saw countless such unions. Young Edward III of England, betrothed at 13 to Philippa of Hainault, her arrival in a procession of silk-draped litters amid the scent of crushed rose petals strewn on the path, forging a bond that brought Flemish support against France. The dark isolation of these young pawns emerges here, sent to foreign courts as virtual hostages, their familiar nurseries replaced by alien halls where languages twisted like unfamiliar vines and customs pinched like ill-fitted shoes. Imagine the long carriage rides through misty forests, the jolt of wheels over rutted roads, the air damp with fog and the earthy smell of leaf mould. As a child like 10-year-old Margaret of Norway sailed to Scotland in 1290 to wed the future Edward II, only to perish en route from illness, her small coffin a tragic emblem of the perils involved. Sensory details immerse you in this world, a tapestry of comfort and constraint. The carriage sways gently, its interior lined with cushioned benches stuffed with horsehair and covered in woolen blankets dyed in madder red, the scent of oiled leather from harnesses mingling with the salt tang of sea air if the journey crosses water. Guards in chainmail clink softly with each step of their mounts, their breath fogging in the chill dawn, while inside, the young royal clutches a prayer book bound in velvet, its pages whispering as fingers trace illuminated initials. Upon arrival in the foreign castle, the isolation deepens, echoing halls with high vaulted ceilings that swallow laughter, meals of unfamiliar dishes like frumenty porridge laced with saffron or roasted peacock served with fanfare, the flavours exotic but the company stiff with protocol. Ladies in waiting assigned by the new court chatter in accents that grate like unpolished stone, their gowns rustling as they teach courtly dances, slow pavanis where every step is a lesson in diplomacy. The human cost weaves through these narratives like a sombre thread in a bright embroidery. Young brides like Isabella, dispatched at 12 to a court rife with intrigue, faced emotional exile. Separated from mothers and siblings, their letters home carried by couriers on swift horses, the parchment sealed with wax that smelled of melted tallow. In Edward's England, she navigated a husband's favouritism toward male courtiers, her youth a shield and a vulnerability, the dark whispers of favouritism and sodomy scandals casting long shadows over her new home. The isolation bred resilience, but also tragedy. Many such children grew into rulers hardened by early trials, like Richard II, whose boyhood betrothal and marriage at 10 to Anne of Bohemia in 1382 amid the peasants' revolt left him wary of the masses, his court a bubble of luxury where French fashions and Italian poets offered escape from the grim realities outside. Examples proliferate across the continent, each a quiet tale of youth bent to power's will. In the Kingdom of Aragon, 13-year-old James I married Eleanor of Castile at 13 in 1241, their union merging Iberian claims against Muslim strongholds, the ceremony in a sun-drenched cathedral with the air heavy with orange blossom incense and the sound of castanets from celebratory dances. Further east, in the Byzantine Empire, young Anna Komnene was betrothed at 8 to Constantine Ducas in the late 11th century. Her intellectual gifts, later chronicled in her Alexiad, nurtured in isolation amid palace intrigues, the scent of myrrh from orthodox icons blending with the salty breeze off the Bosphorus. In Hungary, Bela IV betrothed his daughter Margaret at 5 to a Bohemian prince in 1245 to counter Mongol threats. Her childhood spent in cloistered preparation, learning languages by rote in rooms lit by oil lamps that cast flickering shadows like omens on the walls. The dark isolation extended to boys as well, though less documented. Young princes like Alfonso XI of Castile, married at 13 to Constance of Portugal in 1325, thrust into marital duties amid court factions, their adolescence a whirlwind of tournaments and treaties rather than carefree hunts. The journeys to these new homes were ordeals, convoys of wagons laden with dowry chests, gold plate, embroidered tapestries, spices from the Levant. The creak of axles a constant lullaby over weeks of travel through bandit-haunted woods or storm-tossed seas. Upon arrival, the foreign court loomed intimidating, banquets where minstrels sang of chivalric love in tongues half understood, the taste of strange delicacies like lamprey pie or quail in rosewater sauce lingering on the tongue, while eyes watched for any sign of weakness in the youthful newcomer. Weaving through it all is the irony of power's double edge. These alliances quelled wars but ignited personal torments. Isabella's marriage secured peace but led to her later role in deposing her husband, her isolation fueling a fierce independence that reshaped England. Sensory echoes reinforce the theme, the cold clasp of a wedding ring too loose on a child's finger, the prick of thorns from rose garlands worn at betrothals, the distant howl of wind through turret slits mirroring inner turmoil. In draughty castles like those of the Scottish borders, where young Margaret Tudor was betrothed at 9 to James IV in 1503, the halls rang with bagpipes during feasts, but the nights brought loneliness, the crackle of peat fires the only company as stars wheeled overhead. As the afternoon sun slants lower, casting golden hues on the hall's rush-strewn floor, the narrative of political pawns settles like dust motes in the air. These youthful unions, forged amid threats of invasion and rebellion, treated children as currency in a high-stakes game, their isolation a dark veil over potential joys. Yet in their stories, glimmers of agency emerge: Isabella's eventual queenship, Margaret's diplomatic savvy, a quiet testament to resilience. Little do you know, as we venture onward, how these alliances intertwined with inheritance's iron grip, safeguarding thrones at even greater personal peril. But for now, linger in the hall's gentle warmth, where power's pawns first learn to move. You've now moved deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the medieval castle, where the great hall gives way to the private solar, a sunlit chamber high in the keep, its walls hung with arras tapestries that muffle the outside world's clamour and trap the warmth from a brazier glowing with sea coal. The air here is softer, scented with dried rose petals scattered among the floor rushes and the faint, resinous tang of pine logs crackling in the fireplace, their flames casting a golden hue on the leaded glass windows that overlook misty moors or bustling courtyards below. It's the 13th century, perhaps in the opulent confines of Fontainebleau, or the stark stone of Crac des Chevaliers, and you stand as a trusted confessor or scribe, quill in hand, recording the weighty deliberations of a royal council. Seated at a trestle table strewn with parchments, genealogical charts inked in faded brown, seals dangling like pendants, are the king and his advisers, their faces etched with the lines of constant vigilance. In this era of fleeting lives and fragile legacies, child marriages were the iron chains binding thrones against the tempests of time. They ensured unbroken lineages in a world where death stalked every shadow, controlling inheritance amid high mortality from plagues, battles, and poisons. As we linger in this tranquil yet tense space, let's uncover how these unions safeguarded succession, their dark necessities born of an age where producing heirs early was not choice but survival, narrated softly to draw you into contemplative repose. The solar's atmosphere is one of calculated calm, the table's surface marked by wax drips from candles that burn steadily, their beeswax scent blending with the musty aroma of aged vellum scrolls unrolled to trace bloodlines back through generations. A young heir, perhaps a boy of 10 or a girl on the cusp of 12, sits nearby, dressed in miniature court attire, a tunic of fine wool edged in fur for him, a sideless surcoat over a kirtle for her, the fabrics whispering with each fidget. Their presence is no accident. Medieval monarchs viewed children as extensions of the crown, and marriages arranged in youth were shields against the chaos of disputed successions. High mortality rates defined the era. Kings fell in battle, queens perished in childbirth, infants succumbed to fevers that swept through draughty halls like unseen ghosts. Without secure heirs, kingdoms fractured as seen in the Wars of the Roses later in the 15th century, where rival branches of the Plantagenet line tore England apart over unclear lineages. Child marriages mitigated this by accelerating the production of legitimate offspring, locking in alliances that could produce successors before fate intervened. Consider Henry III of England, betrothed at 9 to Eleanor of Provence in 1236. Their union formalised when he was 28 and she 13, a mismatch in years, but a masterstroke in securing the throne. Henry's father, King John, had left a legacy of baronial revolt, and this marriage brought Provençal wealth and ties to stabilise the realm. The ceremony in Canterbury Cathedral would have been a spectacle of subdued grandeur, the young bride in a gown of Baudekyn silk shimmering under torchlight, the air thick with frankincense from swinging thuribles, and the harmonious chant of monks intoning Te Deum. But beneath the pomp lay grim pragmatism. Eleanor's youth ensured she could bear heirs swiftly, her first child arriving at 16, bolstering Henry's line against usurpers like Simon de Montfort. In the Solar, discussions might revolve around such strategies, advisors murmuring over astrological charts predicting auspicious wedding dates, their voices a low hum like bees in a cloister garden, while the fire pops softly, sending sparks upward like fleeting prayers for longevity. Inheritance laws amplified these necessities, a quiet but inexorable force shaping royal fates. Primogeniture dominated, funneling lands and titles to the eldest son, but daughters could carry claims through marriage, making them vital pawns. In France, under the Solic law, women were barred from inheriting the throne, yet their unions still transferred vast dowries and alliances. Child marriages controlled this flow, preventing estates from splintering or falling to hostile outsiders. The union of 12-year-old Joanna I of Naples to her cousin Andrew of Hungary in 1343 aimed to merge Angevin claims, but Andrew's murder later sparked succession crises, highlighting the stakes. Sensory echoes fill the Solar, the scratch of quill on parchment as genealogies are updated, the metallic tang of ink mixed with gallnuts, the warmth of mulled Hippocras wine sipped from pewter cups to ease tense deliberations. Young Joanna, in her Neapolitan court, might have played with ivory chess pieces symbolizing her role, pawns advancing under king's command, while learning Latin conjugations that mirrored her conjugated future. The grim realities of short lifespans wove darkness into this fabric, a somber undertone like the toll of a distant funeral bell. Medieval life expectancy hovered around 30-40 years for those surviving infancy, ravaged by the Black Death in 1347 to 1351, which claimed up to 60% of Europe's population, or endless conflicts like the Crusades draining noble blood. Kings like Louis IX of France, who arranged his son Philip III's marriage at 13 to Isabella of Aragon in 1258, did so to hedge against his own mortality during holy wars. Isabella, aged 11 at betrothal, bore her first child at 17, securing the Capetian line amid Louis's absences. In the Solar, maps of Outremer might lie unrolled, their inks depicting Jerusalem's walls, while advisors debate betrothals as contingencies, the air heavy with the scent of sandalwood from imported spices used in medicinal draughts against the flux. The pressure to produce heirs early fell heaviest on young queens, their bodies vessels for dynasty, early pregnancies risking health. As with Margaret of Scotland, wed at 11 to Louis XI of France in 1445, her frail frame enduring multiple births before death at 20. Solemn oath-swearing ceremonies marked these unions, blending piety with politics in grand cathedrals like Notre Dame or Westminster Abbey. The young couple, hands joined over a reliquary containing saints' bones, would vow fealty amid clouds of incense and the sonorous Latin of the Mass, the air resonant with organ pipes and choral voices rising like a heavenly choir. Sensory immersion deepens the scene. The cool touch of gold rings slipped onto fingers still chubby from childhood, the prick of embroidered veils on youthful skin, the taste of consecrated wafers dissolving on the tongue as communion sealed the pact. For Henry III and Eleanor, their 1236 wedding at Canterbury featured feasts of swan and heron, the hall filled with the aroma of roasted meats basted in verjuice and the melody of viols, but the underlying tragedy lingered. Eleanor's youth meant isolation in a foreign land, her letters home scented with rose attar to mask tears. Examples across realms illustrate this safeguarding. In the Holy Roman Empire, Otto IV betrothed his daughter at 8 to a Guelph heir around 1208 to counter Ghibelline threats, her childhood spent in cloistered preparation amid the Rhine's vineyards, the air sweet with grape must during harvest. In Castile, Alfonso X married his son Ferdinand at 13 to Blanche of France in 1269. aiming to blend Iberian and Capetian blood against Aragonese claims. The ceremony in Burgos Cathedral with Moorish-influenced tiles underfoot and the scent of orange blossoms from Andalusian gardens. The tragic vulnerabilities emerge. Many children, like 14-year-old Constance of Sicily, wed to Henry VI in 1186, faced consummation too soon, risking physical harm in an age without medical understanding, their bodies bearing the brunt of dynastic urgency. The solar's tranquility belies these perils, the brazier's warmth a contrast to the cold calculus of succession. Advisors might consult herbals for fertility potions, mandrake root steeped in wine, while the young heir listens, eyes wide at tales of ancestors whose thrones toppled for want of sons. Cycles of duty perpetuated, heirs born young often married young, as with Edward I's children betrothed in infancy to continue Plantagenet dominance. Darker still were coerced unions, like that of 12-year-old Ladislaus IV of Hungary to Elizabeth of Sicily in 1270, amid Cuman revolts, his youth stolen by regents' schemes. As evening shadows lengthen, the fire's embers glowing like dying stars, the theme of safeguarding settles softly. These marriages, driven by mortality's shadow, preserved thrones, but at the expense of youth's fragility. Dark threads in history's weave, yet in their endurance quiet strength shone, Henry III's long reign stabilized by Eleanor's heirs. As we proceed, consider how cultural norms sanctified these bonds, blending divine will with human cost. For now, rest in the solar's hush, where thrones stand guarded by the innocent. Congratulations, dear listener. You have now drifted from the tense, strategic confines of the royal solar into the hallowed, echoing sanctuary of a medieval chapel. The air here is cool and still, thick with the sacred scents of old stone, melting beeswax from 1,000 candles, and the lingering sweet aroma of frankincense that clings to the very mortar between the stones. It is perhaps the 15th century, a time of deepening piety and chivalric codes, and you find yourself as a silent member of the congregation, a monk in a woolen habit or a courtier in velvet, witnessing the solemn rites that bind a kingdom. High above, slivers of coloured light from stained glass windows depicting saints like Catherine with her wheel or George slaying the dragon cut through the gloom, painting jewelled, shifting patterns on the worn stone floor. Before the grand altar, gilded with scenes from the life of Christ and flanked by flickering candelabras, stand a young couple, their small forms almost swallowed by the cavernous, vaulted space. Here, in this house of God, the earthly necessities of politics and inheritance were cloaked in the divine will, sanctified by the Church. Child marriages, particularly those around the age of puberty, were not just a political custom. They were a cultural and religious norm, blessed by bishops and woven into the very fabric of feudal society. As we settle into this sacred stillness, let us explore how divine decrees and social expectations erased the line between childhood and duty, their stories whispered softly to guide you into tranquil thought. At the heart of this acceptance was the Church's doctrine on marriage. Canon law, debated by theologians in hushed scriptoriums over dusty vellum texts, set the age of consent at 12 for girls and 14 for boys. To the medieval mind, this was not an arbitrary line. It was rooted in the observable world, seen as the dawn of adulthood when a body was deemed capable of bearing children and a soul capable of understanding the gravity of a holy sacrament. These ages, coinciding with puberty, were considered the natural, God-given threshold for union. A marriage blessed by a priest, regardless of the couple's emotional maturity, was therefore a holy, unbreakable bond, its legitimacy sealed in both earthly law and divine sight. Consider the marriage of Margaret of Anjou to King Henry VI of England in 1445. Margaret was 15, a young woman by the standards of her time, while Henry was a troubled and deeply pious man in his 20s. Their union was a desperate political maneuver to secure a truce in the seemingly endless 100 Years' War. The ceremony at Titchfield Abbey would have been a profoundly religious affair. Imagine the scene. The choir of monks chanting in sonorous Latin, their voices rising and falling in hypnotic plainsong that seems to make the very stones vibrate. Margaret, in a gown of deep blue velvet to symbolize fidelity and royalty, her sleeves lined with white ermine, would kneel before the Archbishop, her young face pale and serene in the candlelight. The vows exchanged were not just promises to each other, but solemn oaths made before God, binding their souls and through them their rival kingdoms. The Church, in its solemn majesty, provided the ultimate justification, turning a fragile political treaty into an immutable, divine decree. This blend of piety and pragmatism was everywhere. Feudal customs, the unwritten laws of land and loyalty, reinforced these norms with an iron grip. Society was envisioned as a great chain of being, a pyramid of obligation stretching from the lowest serf to the king himself, with God presiding over all. A nobleman's daughter was a crucial asset in this structure, her marriage a vital part of the family's sacred duty to their liege lord. Social expectations demanded that girls of noble birth be married young to secure their family's position, forge new alliances, and above all, to prevent the potential scandal of an unwed daughter whose virtue could be questioned. An unmarried noblewoman was an anomaly, a loose and dangerous thread in the tightly woven social tapestry. In this world, childhood as we understand it, a protected, carefree phase of life, was a luxury afforded to very few, if any. For the nobility, life was a series of duties, and the duty of marriage began early. You might see a young couple, like 14-year-old Margaret Beaufort and her much older husband Edmund Tudor, in the 15th century, taking a formal, chaperoned walk in the castle's walled garden. Their conversation would be stilted, carefully monitored by ladies-in-waiting who hovered just out of earshot. Their union was designed for one overwhelming purpose: to produce an heir who could unite the fractured Lancastrian claim to the throne. Margaret fulfilled this duty, giving birth to the future King Henry VII at the age of just 13. This shockingly young age, which resulted in a traumatic, life-threatening birth, was nonetheless celebrated as the ultimate fulfillment of her noble and religious purpose. The profound personal cost was subsumed by the political triumph of securing the Tudor dynasty. The sensory details of these ceremonies draw you deeper into their world. Imagine the cool, smooth and heavy feel of a gold ring blessed with holy water being slipped onto a finger that is not yet fully grown. Feel the scratchy texture of a woolen chasuble, heavily embroidered with gold thread, worn by the presiding priest. Taste the consecrated wine, sweet and potent, from a heavy silver chalice, a symbol of Christ's sacrifice, now sealing an earthly pact. These physical sensations grounded the abstract concepts of duty and divine will in the lived experience of these young royals. The entire culture, from its most sacred religious rites to its rigid social hierarchies, was built to normalize and sanctify these early unions, presenting them not as a choice, but as a noble and necessary destiny, a path preordained by God and King. Let the echoing chants of the chapel fade now, and follow me into the quieter, more private wings of the palace. We leave the public stage of ceremonies and councils and enter the lonely chambers where the true human cost of these unions was paid in silent installments. You are now a silent confidant, a lady-in-waiting or a trusted physician, privy to the tear-stained letters and the whispered fears that the rich tapestries on the walls conceal. The air here is still and close, scented with the rose water used to soothe a throbbing headache, or the dried lavender and chamomile tucked under a pillow to aid a restless, anxious sleep. It is here, in the deep shadows of power, that we can trace the lasting scars left on the young souls who were forced to mature far too soon. While the world outside the castle walls celebrated a successful alliance, you might see a young queen, barely a teenager, weeping silently into her feather pillow, utterly alone in a foreign land and bound to a husband who is a stranger, or worse, a cruel or indifferent partner. The exploitation was not always overt or violent. It was woven into the very structure of their lives, as inescapable as the cold that seeped from the stone walls. The physical risks were immense. An early pregnancy like that of Margaret Beaufort placed a terrible, almost unbearable strain on a body that was not yet fully grown. Childbirth was a life-threatening ordeal for any medieval woman, a battle fought in a dark, crowded room with only the help of midwives. But for a child bride, the dangers were magnified tenfold. You, as a physician, might attend these births in a chamber heated by a roaring fire, the air thick with the scent of fear, sweat and boiling herbs, armed with little more than remedies and prayers, watching helplessly as a young life flickered on the edge of extinction, all in the name of dynastic survival. The emotional scars ran just as deep, if not deeper. Imagine Joan of Navarre, wed at 11 to the Duke of Brittany in the 14th century. She was sent from her vibrant, cultured homeland to a rugged, unfamiliar court on the stormy Atlantic coast. Her letters home, if she was even allowed to write them, would be her only fragile connection to the world and the family she had lost. Picture her in a cold stone chamber, a single tallow candle guttering beside her, casting dancing shadows on the wall. Her quill, cut from a goose feather, trembles in her small hand as she tries to convey her profound loneliness to a mother and father hundreds of miles away. The parchment might be stained with a tear, a small, salty ghost of her silent daily suffering. The isolation was absolute and profound. Surrounded by a new court of ladies in waiting who were often spies for their own families, a young bride had no one to truly trust. Her husband, often much older and preoccupied with the endless matters of state, war, or his own pleasures, might treat her as little more than a political symbol or a vessel for producing the all-important male heir. Neglect was a common cruelty. Emotional and sometimes physical abuse was a dark and unspoken reality, hidden behind the thick castle walls and the rigid facade of courtly etiquette. There are quiet records of young queens who wilted under such relentless pressure, falling into deep, listless depressions or lashing out in a desperate search for affection or a semblance of control over their own lives. Yet, amid this systematic exploitation, you would also witness moments of incredible resilience. These children, robbed of their youth, were forced to become master strategists in their own right, learning to survive in a world of predators. They learned to navigate the treacherous, whispering currents of court intrigue, to build their own networks of loyal allies, and to wield what limited power they had with astonishing skill and cunning. Isabella of France, married at 12 to the weak and notoriously difficult Edward II of England, endured years of public humiliation at his court as he favoured his male companions over her. But her lonely childhood forged in her a core of iron. She mastered the language of power, not just of words, but of symbols and alliances. Eventually she would use that hard-won knowledge to lead a rebellion, depose her own husband and rule the kingdom of England as regent for her young son. These were the hidden rebellions, the quiet triumphs of souls who refused to remain as mere pawns in someone else's game. But for every Isabella who managed to seize power, there were countless others who simply broke under the immense unending strain. They became the young queens who faded into historical obscurity, their health ruined by constant dangerous pregnancies, their spirits crushed by a loneliness that no amount of riches could cure. Their tragedies are the quiet, unwritten footnotes in the grand, triumphant histories of the kings they were forced to marry. As you keep your silent vigil in these shadowed rooms, you come to a sombre understanding. The price of a stable throne, of a lasting peace, was often the complete and utter ruin of a young life. Let us now take our leave of the cold stone and flickering candlelight of the medieval castle. Let the scent of wood smoke and old incense fade, and allow your mind to drift forward gently in time. The world is changing. The great dark tapestry of the Middle Ages, with its stark figures and rigid borders, is giving way to the brighter, more intricate and more human patterns of the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment. You are now an observer of history itself, watching from a quiet distance as the ancient traditions we have explored begin to fray, stretch, and unravel like an old thread. The decline of royal child marriage was not a single dramatic event, but a slow, gradual evolution, a quiet tide turning over centuries, driven by new ideas and the changing realities of power. The rise of humanism during the Renaissance placed a new, revolutionary emphasis on the individual, on education, and on personal fulfillment. Thinkers like Erasmus of Rotterdam, sitting in the quiet of their studies, began to write about the importance of companionship and intellectual friendship in marriage. A radical idea in a world that had long viewed the institution as a purely practical and political contract. These new ideas, born in the bustling universities and sunlit salons of Italy and France, slowly began to filter into the consciousness of the European courts, planting the seeds of change. Scandals and shifts in the more modern Tudor court also played a significant role. The famously tumultuous marital history of King Henry VIII, while driven by his own desperate need for a male heir, put the personal and political turmoil of royal marriage on a very public and dramatic stage. The idea that a monarch could simply set aside a queen of 2 decades, as he did with the devout and noble Catherine of Aragon, undermined the old belief in the sacred, divinely ordained, unbreakable nature of these unions. It starkly showed them to be man-made arrangements that could be unmade by human will, ambition, and desperation. As Europe moved into the 18th and 19th centuries, the very nature of power continued to shift. The rise of centralized nation-states with professional bureaucracies and standing armies meant that alliances were no longer solely dependent on the wombs of young princesses. Complex treaties were negotiated by skilled ambassadors in elegant drawing rooms, and the fate of nations was decided more by economic power, colonial expansion, and military might than by who married whom. The old feudal world of personal loyalties and dynastic land grabs was fading into memory, and with it, the desperate life-or-death necessity for cradle betrothals and child brides. The age of revolutions, first in America, then more seismically in France, sent a shockwave through the ancient gilded houses of Europe. The idea that a monarch's right to rule was absolute and ordained by God was challenged and, in some places, shattered completely. In this new and volatile world, public perception mattered more than ever before. A king who was seen as a tyrant, or one who engaged in practices that seemed cruel and backward to an increasingly educated and empowered populace, risked not just rebellion, but the guillotine. The marriage of a child began to look less like a wise political strategy and more like a distasteful relic of a barbaric and unenlightened past. And so the practice slowly receded. Ages of consent in law were gradually raised, and the modern idea of childhood as a protected and precious stage of life, a time for education and growth, finally began to take root. The stories of the young royals we have witnessed, of Mary, Queen of Scots, of Isabella of France, of Margaret Beaufort, became cautionary tales, historical reminders of a time when the immense weight of a crown was placed on shoulders far too small and fragile to bear it. As we conclude our journey tonight, let us rest in this quiet place of reflection. We have walked through the opulent but confining nurseries, the grand but treacherous halls, and the sacred but calculating chapels of the medieval world. We have seen how a practice that seems abhorrent to us was, for them, a logical and often necessary tool for survival, for power, and for the preservation of a world that was constantly teetering on the edge of chaos. The legacy of these children is a quiet one. It is written in the alliances they forged, the heirs they bore, and the silent suffering they endured. Their stories serve as a somber reminder of the immense human cost of power. And they also remind us of the slow, often painful, but ultimately hopeful march of human progress. As you drift now towards sleep, hold on to that final thought of quiet hope and renewal. The world has changed. Childhood is now seen as something to be protected, not bartered, and in that change we can find a measure of peace.